The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. Read by Daniel Downey. Chapter 4. Overhill and Underhill. There were many paths that led up into those mountains, and many passes over them, but most of the paths were cheats and deceptions and led nowhere or to bad ends, and most of the passes were infested by evil things and dreadful dangers. The dwarves and the Hobbit, helped by the wise advice of Elrond and the knowledge and memory of Gandalf, took the right road to the right pass. Long days after they had climbed out of the valley and left the last homely house miles behind, they were still going up and up and up. It was a hard path and a dangerous path, a crooked way and a lonely and long one. Now they could look back over the lands they had left out behind, far below them. Far, far away in the west, where things were blue and faint, Bilbo knew there lay his own country of safe and comfortable things and his little hobbit hole. He shivered. It was getting bitter cold up here, and the wind came shrill among the rocks. Boulders, too, at times came galloping down the mountainsides, let loose by midday sun upon the snow, and passed among them, which was lucky, or over their heads, which was alarming. The nights were comfortless and chill, and they did not dare to sing or talk too loud, for the echoes were uncanny, and the silence seemed to dislike being broken, except by the noise of water and the wail of wind and the crack of stone. "The summer is getting on down below," thought Bilbo, "and haymaking is going on, and picnics. They'll be harvesting and blackberrying before we even begin to go down the other side at this rate." And the others were thinking equally gloomy thoughts, although when they had said goodbye to Elrond in the high hope of a midsummer morning, they had spoken gaily of the passage of the mountains and of the riding swift across the lands beyond. They had thought of coming to the secret door in the lonely mountain, perhaps that very next last moon of autumn. "And perhaps it will be Durin's day," they had said. Only Gandalf had shaken his head and said nothing. Dwarfs had not passed that way for many, many years, but Gandalf had, and he knew how evil and danger had grown and thrived in the wild since the dragons had driven men from the lands, and the goblins had spread in secret after the battle of the mines of Moria. Even the good plans of wise wizards like Gandalf and the good friends like Elrond go astray sometimes when you are off on dangerous adventures over the edge of the wild, and Gandalf was a wise enough wizard to know it. He knew that something unexpected might happen, and he hardly dared to hope that they would pass without fearful adventure over those great tall mountains with lonely peaks and valleys where no king ruled. All was well until one day they met a thunderstorm. More than a thunderstorm, a thunder battle. You know how terrific a really big thunderstorm can be down in the land and in a river valley, especially at times when two great thunderstorms meet and clash. More terrible still are the thunder and lightning in the mountains at night, when storms come up from the east and west and make war. The lightning splinters on the peaks, the rocks shiver, great crashes split the air and go rolling and tumbling into every cave, every hollow, and the darkness is filled with overwhelming noise and sudden light. Bilbo had never seen or imagined anything of its kind. They were high up in a narrow place with a dreadful fall into a dim valley on one side of them. They were sheltering under a hanging rock for the night, and he lay beneath a blanket and shook from head to toe. When he peeped out in the lightning flashes, he saw that across the valley stone giants were out. They were hurling rocks at one another for a game and catching them and tossing them down into the darkness, where they smashed among the trees far, far below, or splintered into little bits with a bang. Then came a wind and a rain, and the wind whipped the rain and the hail about in every direction, so that in a overhanging rock there was no protection at all. Soon they were getting drenched, and their ponies were standing with their heads down and their tails between their legs, and some of them were whinnying with fright. They could hear the giants guffawing and shouting all over the mountainsides. "This won't do at all," said Thorin. "If we don't get blown off or drowned or struck by lightning, we should be picked up by some giant or kicked sky high for a football." "Well, if you know of anywhere better, take us there," said Gandalf, who was feeling very grumpy and was far from happy about the giants himself. The end of their argument was that they sent Fili and Kili to look for a better shelter. They had very sharp eyes, and being the youngest of the dwarfs by some 50 years, they usually got these sorts of jobs, when everybody could see that there was absolutely no use of sending poor shivering Bilbo. There is nothing like looking, if you want to find something, or so Thorin said to the young dwarfs. You certainly usually find something if you look, but it is not always quite the something you are after. So it proved on this occasion. Soon, Philly and Killy came crawling back, holding on the rocks in the wind. "We found a dry cave," they said. "Not far around the corner. Ponies and all could get inside." "Have you thoroughly explored it?" said the wizard, who knew the caves in the mountains were seldom unoccupied. "Yes, yes," they said, though everybody knew they could not have been long at it, because they'd come back too quick. "It isn't at all that big. It doesn't go far back." That, of course, is the dangerous part about caves. You don't know how far they go back sometimes, or where a passage may lead to, or what is waiting for you on the inside. But now, Philly and Killy's news seemed good enough. So they all got up, prepared to move. The wind was howling and the thunder was growling, and they had a business getting themselves and their ponies along. Still, it was not very far to go, and before long they came to a big rock standing out in the path. If you stepped behind, you found a low arch on the side of the mountain. There was just room to get the ponies through with a squeeze when they had been unpacked and unsaddled. As they passed under the arch, it was good to hear the wind and the rain outside instead of all about them, and to feel safe from the giants and the rocks. But the wizard, he was taking no risks. He lit up his wand, as he did that day in Bilbo's dining room that seemed so long ago, if you remember, and by its light they explored the cave from end to end. It seemed quite a fair size, but not too large and mysterious. It had a dry floor, some comfortable nooks. At one end there was room for the ponies, and there they stood, mighty glad of the change, steaming and champing in their nosebags. Owen and Glowin wanted to light a fire at the door to dry their clothes, but Gandalf would not hear of it. So they spread out their wet things on the floor and got dry ones out of their bundles. Then they made their blankets comfortable, got out their pipes and blew smoke rings. They talked and forgot about the storm and discussed what each would do with their share of the treasure when they got it, which at the moment did not seem so impossible. And so they dropped off to sleep one by one. And that was the last time that they used the ponies, the packages, the baggages, the tools, the paraphernalia that they had brought with them. It turned out a good thing that night that they had brought poor little Bilbo with them after all, for somehow he could not get to sleep for a long while, and when he did sleep, he had very nasty dreams. He dreamt that a crack in the wall at the back of the cave got bigger and bigger and opened wider and wider. He was very afraid, but he could not call out or do anything but lie there and look. Then he dreamed that the floor of the cave was giving way and he was slipping, beginning to fall down goodness knows where to. At that, he woke up with a horrible start and found that part of his dream was true. A crack had opened at the back of the cave, and already a wide passage was open. He had just time to see the last of the ponies' tails disappearing into it. Of course, he gave a very loud yell, as loud as a yell of a hobbit can give, which is surprising for their size. Then out jumped the goblins. Big goblins, great ugly-looking goblins, lots of goblins, before you could say rocks and blocks. There were 6 to each dwarf at least, and 2 even for Bilbo, and they were all grabbed and carried through the crack before you could say tinder and flint. But not Gandalf. Bilbo's yell had done that much good, it had wakened him wide up in a splintered second, and when goblins came to grab him, there was a terrific flash like lightning in the cave, a smell like gunpowder, and several of them fell dead. The crack closed with a snap, and Bilbo and the dwarfs were on the wrong side of it. Where was Gandalf? Of that, neither they nor the goblins had any idea, and goblins did not wait to find out. They seized Bilbo and the dwarfs and hurried them along. It was deep, deep dark, such as goblins that have taken to living in the heart of the mountains can see through. The passages were crossed and tangled in all directions, but the goblins seemed to know their way, as well as you do, to the nearest post office, and the way went down and down. It was most horrible stuff. The goblins were very rough and pinched unmercifully, and chuckled and laughed in their horrible stony voices, and Bilbo was more unhappy even than when the troll had picked him up by his toes. He wished again and again for his nice bright hobbit hole, not for the last time. Now there came a glimmer of red light before them. The goblins began to sing or croak, keeping time with the flap of their flat feet on the stone and shaking the prisoners as well.
Clap, snap, a clap, rap, grab, grab, pinch, snap, and down to
sounded truly terrifying. The walls echoed to the clap-snap and the crush-smash, and to the ugly laughter of their ho-ho, my lad. The general meaning of the song was only too plain, for now the goblins took out whips and whipped them with a swish-snack, and set them running as fast as they could in front of them, and more than one of the dwarfs were already yammering and bleating like anything when they stumbled into a great cavern. It was lit by a great red fire in the middle and by torches along the walls. It was full of goblins. They all laughed and stamped and clapped their hands when the dwarfs, with poor little Bilbo at the back and nearest to the whips, came running in, while the goblin drivers whooped and cracked their whips behind. The ponies were already huddled in a corner, and there were all the baggages and packages lying broken open and being rummaged by goblins and smelt by goblins and fingered by goblins and quarrelled over by goblins. I'm afraid that was the last they ever saw of those excellent little ponies, including a jolly sturdy little white fellow that Elrond had lent Gandalf, since his horse was not suitable for the mountain paths. For goblins eat horses and ponies and donkeys, and much more dreadful things, and they were always hungry. Just now, however, the prisoners were thinking only of themselves. The goblins chained their hands behind their backs and linked them all together in a line and dragged them to the far end of the cavern, with poor little Bilbo tucked in at the end of the row. There, in the shadows, on a large flat stone, sat a tremendous goblin with a huge head, and armed goblins were standing round him, carrying the axes and the bent swords that they use. Now, goblins are cruel, wicked, and bad-hearted. They make no beautiful things, but they do make clever ones. They can tunnel and mind as well as but the best skilled dwarfs. When they make the trouble, though, they usually are untidy and dirty. Hammers, axes, swords, daggers, pickaxes, tongs, and also instruments of torture they make very well, or they get other people to make their designs, prisoners and slaves they work until they die for want of air and light. It is not unlikely that they invented some of the machines that have since troubled the world, especially the ingenious devices for killing large numbers of people at once. For wheels and engines and explosions always delighted them, and also not working with their own hands more than they could help. But in those days, and in those wild parts, they had not advanced, as it's so-called, so far. They did not hate dwarfs especially, no more than they hated everybody else, and particularly the orderly and prosperous, in some parts wicked dwarfs, had even made alliances with them. But they had a special grudge against Thorin's folk, because of the war which you have heard mentioned, but which does not come into this tale. And anyway, goblins don't care who they catch, as long as it is done smart and secret, and the prisoners are not able to defend themselves.
"Who are these miserable persons?"
said the great goblin.
"Dwarf, and this,"
said one of the drivers, pulling at Bilbo's chain so he fell forward onto his knees.
"We found them, sheltering in the front porch."
"What do you mean by it?"
said the great goblin, turning to Thorin.
"Up to no good, I'll warrant. Spying on my private business of my people, I guess. Thieves! I shouldn't be surprised to learn thieves, murderers, friends of elves, not unlikely. Come, what do you have to say?"
"Thorin the dwarf, at your service," he replied. It was merely a polite nothing. "Of the things which you suspect and imagine, we have no idea at all. We sheltered from a storm in what seemed a convenient cave, and unused. Nothing was further from our thoughts than inconveniencing goblins in any way whatever." That was true enough. said the great goblin.
"So you say? Might I ask what you're doing up in the mountains at all? Where you're coming from? Where you're going to? In fact, I should like to know all about you. Not that it will do you much good, Thorin Oakenshield. I know too much about your folk already. But let's have the truth. I'll prepare something particularly uncomfortable